The sound of a violin pierced through the thin walls of the apartment building at exactly 6 in the morning. It was the same time every day, the same relentless practice, the same haunting melodies that seemed to seep into every corner of the old brownstone on West 72nd Street. For most residents, it had become background noise, something they had learned to live with over the past 3 months. But for Richard Castellano, the man in apartment 4B, it had become an obsession, a torment that was slowly unraveling his carefully constructed life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Richard pressed his palms against his temples, trying to block out the sound. He had been awake for the past 2 hours, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to start. And now it had. The violin sang through the walls, a complex piece that required technical precision and emotional depth. Whoever was playing knew what they were doing, but that only made it worse. If it had been amateur screeching, Richard could have complained to the landlord, could have made a case for noise violation. But this was different. This was art, and art was protected in Manhattan, especially in a building full of artists and musicians and people who believed creativity was more important than sleep. Richard threw off his covers and sat up. His bedroom was dark, the curtains drawn tight against the early morning light. He reached for his phone on the nightstand and checked the time. 6:15. He had a conference call at 8, a presentation to prepare, a day full of meetings that required his full attention. But how could he focus when this sound invaded his space every single morning? He scrolled through his contacts, his finger hovering over the landlord's number. He had called 3 times already this month. Each time, the landlord had given him the same response. The musician was within their rights. They were practicing during legal hours. There was nothing he could do. Richard stood and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to look out at the street below. The city was beginning to wake. Yellow cabs cruised down the avenue. A jogger passed by with a dog. A homeless man pushed a shopping cart filled with bottles and cans. Normal life continued while Richard felt trapped in his own apartment, held hostage by someone else's ambition. He turned away from the window and walked to the wall that separated his apartment from the one next door. He placed his hand flat against it, feeling the vibrations of the music. It was coming from 4C, the apartment directly adjacent to his bedroom. He had never met the person who lived there. In 3 months, he had never once seen them in the hallway or the elevator or the lobby. It was as if they were a ghost, existing only as sound, as this constant reminder that Richard's life was not entirely his own. The music stopped suddenly. Richard held his breath, hoping it was over for the morning. But after a brief pause, it started again. This time it was a different piece, something slower and more melancholic. Richard recognized it vaguely, something classical, something he might have heard in a movie or a commercial. The notes were long and sustained, requiring incredible breath control and bow technique. Whoever this person was, they were dedicated. Richard had to give them that. But dedication did not pay his bills. Dedication did not help him keep his job at the investment firm where he was already on thin ice after missing a major deadline last month because he had been too exhausted to think straight. Richard walked to his closet and pulled out a suit. Navy blue, freshly pressed, the uniform of his profession. He had worked hard to get where he was. Columbia Business School, 3 years as an analyst, 2 years as an associate, and now finally a vice president position that came with a corner office and a salary that allowed him to afford this apartment in Manhattan. But what good was success if he could not sleep in his own home? What good was money if he was too tired to enjoy it? He got dressed methodically, going through the motions he had performed thousands of times before. Shirt, tie, pants, jacket, shoes. He looked at himself in the mirror. Dark circles under his eyes. His face was thinner than it used to be. He had lost weight from the stress, from the lack of sleep, from the constant anxiety that had become his companion over these past 3 months. The violin continued its song. Richard closed his eyes and tried to remember what silence sounded like. He used to love silence. He used to crave it after long days at the office, after dealing with demanding clients and impossible deadlines. He would come home, pour himself a glass of scotch, and sit in his living room with a book, enjoying the peace of his own space. But that peace was gone now. Even when the violin was not playing, Richard could hear it in his mind. It had invaded his thoughts, his dreams, his every waking moment. He was becoming obsessed, and he knew it. But knowing did not help him stop. Richard left his bedroom and walked through his apartment to the kitchen. It was a nice apartment, one bedroom with hardwood floors and exposed brick walls and large windows that let in good light. He had decorated it carefully, minimally, with modern furniture and abstract art that he had purchased from a gallery in Chelsea. Everything in its place. Everything clean and organized. It was the kind of apartment that impressed dates, that made his parents proud when they visited from New Jersey, that represented everything he had worked for. But now it felt like a prison. He made coffee, strong and black, and stood at the counter drinking it while the violin played on. He checked his phone again. 6:45. The music would continue for another hour at least, maybe 2. That was the pattern. Morning practice from 6 to 8, then silence until evening when it would start again around 7 and continue until 10 or sometimes 11 at night. Richard had tracked it, had documented every session in a notebook like a detective gathering evidence. But evidence of what? The musician was not breaking any rules. They were not violating any laws. They were simply living their life, pursuing their passion, completely unaware or uncaring that they were destroying someone else's sanity in the process. Richard set down his coffee cup harder than he intended. It made a sharp crack against the granite countertop. He was angry, and that anger had been building for months. He was not an angry person by nature. He prided himself on being calm, rational, controlled. But everyone had a breaking point, and Richard was approaching his. He walked to the wall that separated the two apartments and raised his fist. He knocked hard, 3 sharp raps that echoed through his apartment. The music stopped. Richard waited, his heart pounding. Maybe they would come to the door. Maybe they would finally have a conversation, neighbor to neighbor, 2 adults who could work something out. But the music started again after just a few seconds. Louder this time, or maybe it just seemed louder because Richard was paying more attention. He knocked again, harder. Nothing. The music continued, relentless, indifferent. Richard felt something snap inside him. He was a successful man. He was used to solving problems, to finding solutions, to making things happen. And if talking did not work, if knocking did not work, then maybe money would work. Money solved most problems in Manhattan. Why should this be any different? Richard went back to his bedroom and grabbed his wallet from the dresser. He pulled out his checkbook, something he rarely used anymore in the age of digital payments. But this required something tangible, something concrete. He sat on the edge of his bed and wrote out a check. Pay to the order of whoever lived in apartment 4C. The amount, $50,000. It was absurd. It was desperate. But Richard was past caring about absurdity. He was past caring about anything except getting his life back. He tore the check from the book and stared at it. $50,000 to stop playing the violin. $50,000 to give him back his peace, his sleep, his sanity. It was more than generous. It was more money than most people made in a year. Surely whoever lived next door would accept it. Surely they would understand that this was a serious offer, that Richard was at the end of his rope. He folded the check and put it in his pocket. Then he left his apartment and walked the few steps to the door of 4C. He knocked. The music stopped immediately this time. Richard waited, straightening his tie, preparing what he would say. He would be calm. He would be polite. He would simply present the offer and let them decide. Footsteps approached from inside the apartment. The locks clicked. The door opened just a crack, and Richard saw a face peering out at him. It was a woman, younger than he expected, maybe late 20s. She had dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, sharp green eyes that looked suspicious, and she was wearing an old sweater and sweatpants. She looked tired, like she had been awake for as long as Richard had. "Can I help you?" she said. Her voice was hoarse, like she had been talking or singing for hours. Richard cleared his throat and pulled the check from his pocket. He held it up so she could see it. "I am your neighbor, Richard Castellano from 4B. I have a proposition for you." The woman looked at the check, then back at Richard. Her expression did not change. She did not open the door any wider. "What kind of proposition?" she asked. Her tone was wary, defensive. Richard could not blame her. It was early in the morning, and here was a stranger offering her money. It probably seemed strange, possibly dangerous. But Richard pressed on. "I will give you $50,000 if you stop playing the violin," he said. The words came out more bluntly than he intended. He had meant to ease into it, to explain his situation, to appeal to her understanding. But exhaustion and frustration had made him direct. The woman stared at him for a long moment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Then she laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was sharp and bitter and full of disbelief. "You want to pay me to stop practicing," she said. Richard nodded. "Yes. $50,000. Cash or check, your choice. I just need you to stop. The morning sessions, the evening sessions, all of it. I need silence." The woman shook her head slowly. "You have no idea what you are asking." Richard felt his frustration rising again. "I know exactly what I am asking. I am asking for my life back. I have not slept properly in 3 months because of your playing. I have missed work. I have made mistakes. I am at my breaking point. $50,000 is more than fair compensation for you to practice somewhere else, to rent a studio, to do whatever you need to do somewhere that is not right next to my bedroom." The woman's eyes hardened. "This is my home. I have every right to practice here." Richard held up the check again. "I am not saying you do not have the right. I am offering you a solution that benefits both of us. You get a substantial amount of money, and I get my peace back. It is simple." The woman looked at the check again, and for a moment, Richard thought she might actually consider it. But then she stepped back and started to close the door. "I am not interested in your money," she said. Richard put his hand on the door frame, stopping it from closing completely. "Wait. Please. Just think about it. You could use that money for anything. Better equipment, a better apartment, whatever you want. Just please stop playing here." The woman looked at his hand on the door, then back at his face. Her expression was a mixture of anger and pity. "You do not understand," she said quietly. "I cannot stop. I have Carnegie Hall in 6 weeks. The words hit Richard like cold water. Carnegie Hall. One of the most prestigious concert venues in the world. He stared at the woman, really seeing her for the first time. The exhaustion in her face was not just from lack of sleep. It was from pressure, from preparation, from the weight of something enormous. Carnegie Hall, he repeated. The woman nodded. I am Sophia Reeves. I am a violinist. I have my debut recital at Carnegie Hall in 6 weeks, and I am nowhere near ready. That is why I practice as much as I do. That is why I cannot stop. Richard felt his certainty wavering. A debut at Carnegie Hall was significant. It was the kind of opportunity that could make or break a career. But that did not change his situation. That did not give him back his sleep. I understand that is important to you, Richard said carefully. But surely you can practice somewhere else. Rent a studio. Find a rehearsal space. There are options that do not involve keeping your neighbors awake. Sophia shook her head. Do you have any idea how expensive studio rental is in Manhattan? I am barely making rent as it is. Every dollar I have is going toward this performance. Commissioning the right pieces, hiring an accompanist, printing programs, everything. I do not have the luxury of renting studio space for 8 hours a day. This apartment is all I have." Richard felt a pang of something, sympathy maybe, but it was quickly overridden by his own desperation. "Then take the 50,000, he said. "Use it for studio space. Use it for whatever you need. Just stop playing here." Sophia looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "You really do not get it, do you? This is not about money. This is about my entire future. I have been working toward this moment for 20 years. 20 years of practice, of competitions, of sacrifices. Carnegie Hall is everything. It is the validation of my entire career. And you want me to risk that because you cannot sleep?" Her words stung. Richard knew he sounded selfish. He knew his problems seemed trivial compared to her dreams. But his suffering was real too. His exhaustion was real. His failing performance at work was real. Why did her dreams have to come at the cost of his well-being? "I am not asking you to risk anything," Richard said. "I am offering you resources to prepare better. $50,000 could help you, not hurt you." Sophia laughed again, that same bitter sound. "And what happens when that money runs out? What happens when Carnegie Hall is over and I have to come back to reality? You will have bought yourself 6 weeks of silence, and I will have lost the only place where I can afford to live and practice. No thank you." She stepped back again, and this time Richard let the door close. He stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door, the check still in his hand. Inside, the violin started playing again. The same relentless practice, the same beautiful torture. Richard went back to his apartment feeling defeated. He had offered a fortune, and it had been rejected. What else could he do? He could move, but finding another apartment in Manhattan that he could afford was nearly impossible. He could file formal complaints, but as the landlord had already told him, Sophia was not violating any rules. He could buy noise-canceling headphones, but he had already tried that and found them uncomfortable and ineffective against the persistent sound of a violin. He was trapped, and Sophia Reeves, the violinist who was preparing for Carnegie Hall, had all the power. Richard went through his morning routine on autopilot. Shower, shave, final check of his appearance. He left his apartment at 7:30 and made his way down to the lobby. The elevator was old and slow, giving him time to think. Carnegie Hall. Sophia had said she had been working toward this moment for 20 years. That kind of dedication was admirable, he supposed. But it did not make his situation any easier. As the elevator reached the ground floor and the doors opened, Richard stepped out and nearly collided with an elderly woman entering the building. She was small and elegant, with silver hair and kind eyes. She smiled at him apologetically. "Oh, excuse me, dear. I was not watching where I was going." Richard stepped aside to let her pass. "It is fine. No harm done." The woman paused and looked at him more closely. "You look exhausted. Are you feeling all right?" Richard forced a smile. "Just working too hard, I guess." The woman nodded sympathetically. "You young people always do. When I was your age, I thought burning the candle at both ends was the secret to success. But all it got me was sick and miserable. You need rest, dear. That is when the real magic happens." Richard thanked her and left the building, but her words stayed with him. Rest. He could not remember the last time he had truly rested. The workday passed in a blur. Richard went through the motions, attended his meetings, gave his presentation. But his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about Sophia Reeves and her violin and Carnegie Hall. During lunch, he pulled out his phone and searched for her name. There were a few results. Articles about young violinists to watch. A profile piece from 2 years ago in a classical music magazine. A YouTube video of a performance she had given at a small venue in Brooklyn. Richard clicked on the video. The quality was not great, shot from the back of the room on someone's phone. But when Sophia started playing, Richard understood immediately why she was getting a chance at Carnegie Hall. She was exceptional. The technical precision was there, but it was more than that. There was emotion in her playing, a depth that made Richard feel something he had not felt in a long time. It moved him, despite himself, despite his resentment. He watched several more videos, each one showing a different side of her artistry. In some pieces, she was fierce and dramatic. In others, she was tender and vulnerable. She had range. She had talent. And she was risking everything for this one performance. Richard closed his phone and stared out the window of his office. Manhattan stretched out before him, millions of people all pursuing their own dreams, all fighting their own battles. Somewhere in that vast city was Sophia Reeves, probably practicing right now, preparing for the moment that would define her career. And here was Richard, trying to stop her. The guilt started to creep in. Richard had always thought of himself as a reasonable person, someone who supported the arts, who appreciated culture. He had season tickets to the Met. He attended gallery openings. He donated to the Philharmonic. But when art inconvenienced him personally, when it disrupted his comfort, he had been willing to pay $50,000 to make it stop. What did that say about him? What did that say about his values? He tried to push the thoughts away and focus on work, but they lingered. By the time he left the office at 7, Richard had made a decision. He was going to try talking to Sophia again, but this time with a different approach. Not as someone trying to buy her off, but as someone trying to understand. When Richard arrived home, the violin was already playing. He unlocked his apartment and stood in the entryway, just listening. The music filled the space, complex and demanding. He could hear the difficulty in what she was attempting, the passages that required perfect timing and control. He heard her stop and repeat a section, then stop and repeat it again. She was drilling, working on the parts that were not yet perfect. Richard set down his briefcase and walked to the wall. Instead of knocking in frustration, he just stood there, listening. Really listening for the first time in 3 months. And as he listened, he began to hear the story in the music. The struggle, the hope, the fear, the determination. All of it was there in the notes. After about 20 minutes, the music stopped. Richard heard movement in the apartment next door. Now or never. He left his apartment and knocked on Sophia's door again. This time when she opened it, her expression was immediately defensive. "What do you want now? More money? Double the offer?" Richard shook his head. "No. I want to apologize." Sophia's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Apologize? For what?" "For this morning," Richard said. "For trying to buy you off without understanding what this performance means to you. I watched some of your videos today. You are incredibly talented." Sophia crossed her arms, still wary. "Thank you. But that does not change the situation. I still need to practice, and you still want me to stop." "Actually," Richard said, "I wanted to ask if I could listen." "Really listen?" "To a full practice session. Maybe if I understand better what you are working on, what you are trying to achieve, it will be easier for me to cope with the sound." Sophia stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "You want to listen to me practice?" Richard nodded. "If you will let me. I know it is an unusual request. But I think part of my problem is that I have been treating your music as noise, as an interruption. Maybe if I approach it differently, as something to appreciate rather than something to resent, it will help." Sophia considered this for a long moment. Then, to Richard's surprise, she stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. Richard entered apartment 4C cautiously. It was similar in layout to his own, but completely different in atmosphere. Where Richard's apartment was minimal and organized, Sophia's was cluttered with music. Sheet music covered every surface. A music stand stood in the middle of the living room. A keyboard was pushed against one wall. Posters of famous violinists hung on the walls alongside concert programs and photographs. It looked like the home of someone who lived and breathed music. Sophia gestured to a worn couch. You can sit there. But I am warning you, I am working on the hardest section of my program right now. It is not going to sound pretty. That is the point of practice. Richard sat down. I understand. Sophia picked up her violin from where it rested on a chair. It was a beautiful instrument, old and well cared for, with a rich amber color. She adjusted the shoulder rest and tightened her bow. Then she looked at Richard. The piece I am working on is Sarasate's Carmen Fantasy. It is technically one of the most difficult pieces in the violin repertoire. Fast passages, high notes, complex rhythms. It requires perfect control and stamina. I have the first few sections down, but the middle section is killing me. I have been working on it for weeks, and I still cannot get it right. She did not wait for Richard to respond. She raised the violin to her shoulder, positioned her bow, and began to play. The sound was different when Richard was in the same room. It was fuller, richer, more immediate. He could see the physical effort required, the way Sophia's fingers flew across the fingerboard, the way her bow arm moved with precision and force. She played for about 2 minutes before stopping abruptly. See? She said, frustration clear in her voice. That transition is not clean. I keep rushing it, and it throws off the rest of the phrase. She went back to the beginning of the section and played it again. This time Richard watched her face. He saw the concentration, the way she listened critically to every note. She stopped again, shook out her arms, and tried once more. For the next hour, Richard sat on Sophia's couch and watched her work. It was fascinating in a way he had not expected. She was not just playing the violin. She was problem-solving, experimenting with different approaches, analyzing what worked and what did not. She would play a passage slowly, then gradually increase the tempo. She would isolate difficult measures and repeat them dozens of times. She would sing along to certain sections, as if hearing her own voice helped her understand the phrasing. It was methodical and exhausting and completely absorbing. Richard found himself leaning forward, invested in whether she would nail the troublesome transition. And when she finally did, when she played through the entire section without stopping, he felt a surge of satisfaction as if he had accomplished something himself. Sophia lowered her violin and looked at him with surprise. Did you just cheer? Richard realized he had made a small sound of celebration. Sorry. That was involuntary. But yes, that was incredible. You got it. Sophia smiled for the first time since Richard had met her. It was a genuine smile that transformed her face. Yeah. I think I finally did. She set down her violin and stretched her arms above her head. Her shoulders were tense, her muscles tight from the physical demands of playing. Thank you for sitting through that. I know it is probably boring for someone who does not play. Boring? Richard said. That was one of the most interesting things I have watched in months. You are like an athlete, but with music. The discipline, the repetition, the problem-solving. I had no idea that was what practice looked like. Sophia sat down in a chair across from him. Most people do not. They come to concerts and hear the finished product and think it just happens naturally. But this is what it takes. Hours and hours of this, every single day, for years. Richard leaned back on the couch. So Carnegie Hall in 6 weeks. That must be terrifying. Sophia laughed, but there was no humor in it. Terrifying does not begin to cover it. This is the biggest opportunity of my career. If I do well, it could change everything. Better bookings, more prestigious venues, maybe even a recording contract. But if I fail, if I am not ready, it could be the end. The classical music world is brutal. You do not get many chances. Richard thought about his own career, the pressure he felt to perform, to meet expectations. But his mistakes could be hidden, could be fixed with emails and conference calls. Sophia's performance would be public, permanent, judged by hundreds of people in real time. How did you get this opportunity? Richard asked. Sophia's expression softened. I won a competition last year. The prize was a debut recital at Carnegie Hall. It was the most surreal moment of my life. I have dreamed about playing there since I was a child. My parents used to take me to concerts there when I was growing up. I would sit in the audience and watch these incredible musicians and think someday that will be me. And now it actually will be, and I am completely terrified that I will mess it up. Richard heard the vulnerability in her voice. You will not mess it up. You are too prepared, too dedicated. Sophia shook her head. You do not know that. Anything can happen. A memory slip, a technical mistake, nerves that freeze me up. I have seen it happen to other musicians. Brilliant performers who choke under pressure. What if that is me? Richard was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, Can I ask you something? Why do you do this? Why put yourself through this level of stress and pressure? Is it worth it? Sophia looked at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Because when I really play and everything comes together, it is the only time I feel completely myself. The rest of life is noise and confusion and doubt. But when I have my violin and I am making music, everything makes sense. That is worth any amount of stress. That is worth everything. Her words reminded Richard of how he used to feel about his own work, back when he first started at the firm. He had loved the challenge, the problem-solving, the sense of accomplishment. But somewhere along the way, it had become just a job, just a means to pay bills and maintain a lifestyle. When had he lost that passion? When had he stopped doing something that made him feel completely himself? I should let you get back to practice, Richard said, standing up. Thank you for letting me sit in. I think I understand better now. Sophia stood as well. Does that mean you are withdrawing your $50,000 offer? Richard smiled. I think so. Though if you ever need anything, a less disruptive form of help, let me know. I may not understand music like you do, but I understand what it is like to work towards something important. Sophia walked him to the door. For what it is worth, I am sorry about the noise. I know it is intrusive. If I could afford to practice elsewhere, I would. Richard nodded. I know. Good luck with the rest of your preparation. Carnegie Hall is lucky to have you. As Richard walked back to his apartment, he felt different. Lighter somehow, despite his exhaustion. The violin started up again as soon as he closed his door, but this time he did not feel the usual spike of irritation. Instead, he listened and tried to hear what Sophia was working on, tried to appreciate the effort behind each note. It was still loud. It still kept him from the silence he craved. But now it meant something different. Now it was not just noise. It was someone's dream taking shape, one difficult measure at a time. Richard made himself dinner and ate while the violin sang through the walls. He thought about what Sophia had said, about feeling completely herself when she played. He could not remember the last time he had felt that way about anything. His life had become so focused on achievement, on climbing the corporate ladder, on accumulating the markers of success. But what was it all for if he never felt truly alive? That night, Richard slept better than he had in weeks. Not because the violin stopped, it did not, but because his relationship to the sound had changed. He had context now. He had understanding. And somehow that made all the difference. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Richard would come home from work, and instead of immediately putting on headphones or banging on the walls, he would sometimes knock on Sophia's door and ask if he could listen. Not every day, but a few times a week. And Sophia, perhaps grateful for the company or simply too focused to object, would let him in. Richard learned the pieces she was preparing, learned to recognize the difficult passages, learned to hear the improvement from one session to the next. He also learned about Sophia's life. She was 29 years old, originally from upstate New York. Her parents had been music teachers, both of them, who had recognized her talent early and sacrificed everything to give her lessons, to send her to summer programs, to support her dreams. They had died in a house fire when she was in college, a tragedy that had nearly ended her career. She had taken 2 years off, working random jobs and barely touching her violin. But eventually, she had come back to music because it was the only way she knew how to process her grief, the only way she felt connected to her parents. Every time she played, she was playing for them, honoring their memory, trying to make their sacrifices mean something. Richard shared his own story too, though it felt less dramatic in comparison. Middle-class childhood in New Jersey, good student, business school, corporate job. A life that looked successful on paper but felt increasingly empty. He told Sophia about his recent struggles at work, about how the lack of sleep had affected his performance, about how he had been so focused on blaming her that he had not stopped to examine his own life. "Why do you do it?" Sophia asked him one evening. "The job, I mean. If it makes you miserable, why not do something else?" Richard had not had a good answer. "Because it is what I am supposed to do. Because I have invested years in this career. Because I do not know what else I would do." Sophia had looked at him with something like pity. "Those are not reasons. Those are excuses." Her words haunted Richard over the following days. Was his entire career built on excuses? Had he been so busy climbing the ladder that he had never stopped to ask if he was climbing the right one? These were uncomfortable questions, and Richard did not have answers. But for the first time in years, he was asking them. And that felt like progress. 2 weeks before Carnegie Hall, Sophia had a crisis. Richard heard it through the wall. The music stopped abruptly, followed by a crash and what sounded like crying. He hesitated for only a moment before leaving his apartment and knocking on her door. Sophia opened it with tears streaming down her face, her violin clutched in one hand. "What happened?" Richard asked. "Is everything okay?" "No," Sophia said, her voice breaking. "Everything is not okay. I just broke my bow. My good bow, the one I have had for 10 years. I was adjusting the tension and the screw stripped and now it is useless." She held up the bow, and Richard could see that the mechanism at the base was indeed broken. "I have a backup bow," Sophia continued, "but it is not the same. It does not feel right. And I do not have time to get used to a new bow. The performance is in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I am going to have to play Carnegie Hall with a bow I do not trust." She sank down onto her couch, still crying. Richard felt helpless. He knew nothing about violins or bows or what could be done to fix this. But he knew about problems, and he knew about finding solutions. "How much does a good bow cost?" he asked. Sophia laughed bitterly through her tears. "More than I have. A professional bow can cost anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000, depending on the maker. I cannot afford that. I can barely afford my rent." Richard made a decision. "Give me until tomorrow," he said. "Let me see what I can do." Sophia looked up at him with confusion. "What are you going to do?" Richard smiled. "I work in finance. Finding money for things is literally my job. Trust me." He left her apartment and went straight to his laptop. He spent the next 3 hours researching violin bows, bow makers, repair shops. He made phone calls, sent emails, pulled in favors from contacts. By midnight, he had found a solution. There was a renowned bow maker in Brooklyn who had a cancellation and could see Sophia the next day. Richard had already arranged the appointment and put down a deposit on a new bow from the maker's existing inventory, a professional-grade bow that the maker guaranteed would serve Sophia well. The cost was $15,000. Richard paid it without hesitation. The next morning, Richard knocked on Sophia's door early. When she answered, eyes still red from crying, he handed her a piece of paper with an address and time. "What is this?" she asked. "An appointment with a bow maker in Brooklyn. Today at 2. He has a bow ready for you to try. If you like it, it is yours." Sophia stared at the paper, then at Richard. "I cannot accept this." Richard cut her off. "Yes, you can. Consider it an investment. When you are famous and playing concert halls all over the world, you can pay me back if you want. But right now, you need this. And I have the means to help. So let me help. Sophia's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed to be grateful tears. Why are you doing this? Because I have listened to you practice every day for 3 months, Richard said. And I know how hard you have worked. You deserve to perform with the best equipment. You deserve every possible advantage. And maybe because I have been a selfish jerk, and this is my way of trying to make up for it. Sophia hugged him suddenly, fiercely. Thank you did not seem adequate, but it was all she could manage. Richard drove her to Brooklyn that afternoon. The bowmaker's workshop was a small space filled with tools and materials and half-finished bows in various stages of completion. The maker himself was an elderly man with gnarled hands and sharp eyes. He examined Sophia's broken bow and shook his head sadly. This was a good bow. Unfortunate. But these things happen. He brought out the new bow, and Richard watched as Sophia tested it. She played a few scales, then a passage from one of her Carnegie Hall pieces. Her eyes widened. This is incredible, she said. The balance, the responsiveness. It is even better than my old bow. The bowmaker smiled with pride. I am glad it suits you. Go make beautiful music with it. On the drive back to Manhattan, Sophia was quiet, holding the bow carefully in its case. Finally, she said, I do not know how to thank you. You just changed everything. Richard kept his eyes on the road. You do not have to thank me. Just play well at Carnegie Hall. The remaining days before Carnegie Hall passed in a blur of intensity. Richard found himself increasingly involved in Sophia's preparation, not musically, he had no expertise there, but in every other way he could help. He took care of practical matters that she was too stressed to handle. He picked up her dry cleaning when she was too absorbed in practice to leave the apartment. He made sure she ate, bringing her meals when he noticed she had gone all day without food. He scheduled appointments with her accompanist, confirmed details with the venue, even helped her design the program that would be handed out to audience members. Sophia protested at first, insisting she could not accept so much help. But Richard was persistent. You need to focus on the music, he told her. Let me handle everything else. That is what I am good at. Organization, logistics, making things happen. You are good at creating beauty. Let each of us do what we do best. Sophia eventually relented, perhaps because she realized she did need the help, or perhaps because she had come to trust Richard in a way that surprised both of them. They had become friends, an unlikely pairing brought together by circumstance and proximity. The man who had once wanted to pay her to stop playing had become her biggest supporter. Richard attended one of Sophia's rehearsals with her accompanist, a serious young man named David who played piano with technical precision but not much warmth. They worked through the program in Sophia's apartment, which was barely large enough for both the piano and the people. Richard sat in the corner, trying to stay out of the way, watching as Sophia and David worked through complicated passages, stopped to discuss interpretation, argued about tempo. The rehearsal lasted 3 hours, and by the end, both musicians looked exhausted. After David left, Sophia collapsed on her couch. How did it sound? She asked Richard. Be honest. Richard chose his words carefully. Technically, it sounded perfect. You both played everything correctly. But it felt a bit disconnected, like you were playing separate pieces that happened to be at the same time rather than playing together. Sophia nodded slowly. That is what I was afraid of. David is a good pianist, but we do not have chemistry. And chemistry matters in performance. It is the difference between notes on a page and actual music. Can you find someone else? Richard asked. Sophia shook her head. Not this late. Everyone good is already booked. And I have already paid David a deposit. I will just have to make it work somehow. Richard made a mental note to see if he could help with that too, though he was not sure how. The week before the performance, Richard took a few days off work. His boss was not pleased, but Richard did not care. for the first time in his career, something felt more important than his job. He spent those days helping Sophia in any way he could. He sat through her practice sessions, offering encouragement when she got frustrated with herself. He drove her to a final fitting for the gown she would wear at the performance, a simple black dress that she had bought second-hand and then altered to fit perfectly. He helped her move furniture in her apartment to create better acoustics for her practicing. He became her assistant, her support system, her friend. They talked for hours during those days, conversations that ranged from the profound to the mundane. Sophia told him about her childhood, about growing up in a house where music was always playing, where dinner conversations were about composers and interpretations and the meaning of beauty. She told him about her first violin teacher, a stern Russian woman who had made her cry regularly but who had also taught her discipline and dedication. She told him about her parents, about their belief that art mattered, that creating beauty in the world was a worthy pursuit even if it did not make you rich or famous. "My father used to say that artists are the memory keepers of humanity," Sophia said. "We preserve emotions and experiences in a form that can outlive us. When people listen to Beethoven or Mozart or any great composer, they are connecting with someone who died centuries ago. That is the power of art. It transcends time." Richard found himself thinking about his own life in contrast. What was he preserving? What would outlive him? Spreadsheets and investment portfolios and quarterly reports? He had been successful by conventional measures, but what did it mean? What was he contributing to the world? These thoughts made him uncomfortable, but he could not stop thinking them. Sophia noticed his contemplative mood one evening. "You have been quiet today," she said. "What is on your mind?" Richard hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I have been thinking about what I am doing with my life. About whether it matters." Sophia set down her violin and looked at him seriously. "Of course it matters. Everything we do matters to someone. But I think the question you are really asking is whether your work matters to you. Whether it fulfills you. Does it?" Richard took a long time to answer. "It used to," he finally said. "When I first started, I felt like I was solving puzzles, helping companies grow, making smart decisions that had real impact. But somewhere along the way, it became just about the money. About making more, earning more, having more. And now I look around at my life and I have all this success, but I am not sure what it is for." Sophia nodded as if she understood. That is why art is important. It reminds us that there are things beyond material success. Things that feed the soul. You have been feeding your ambition but starving your soul. That is why you could not sleep. It was not just the noise of my practicing. It was the noise of your own unhappiness keeping you awake. Her words struck Richard with the force of truth. He had been unhappy for longer than he wanted to admit. The lack of sleep was just a symptom of a deeper problem. He had built a life that looked good from the outside but felt hollow from the inside. And meeting Sophia, watching her pursue something with such passion and dedication despite all the obstacles, had forced him to confront that hollowness. "What should I do?" Richard asked. Sophia smiled gently. "I cannot answer that for you. But I think you already know. You just need to be brave enough to listen to yourself." Richard did not respond, but he thought about her words long into the night. 3 days before Carnegie Hall, Sophia had a complete breakdown. Richard arrived at her apartment for their usual evening session and found her sitting on the floor, her violin beside her, sobbing uncontrollably. He rushed to her side, kneeling down. "What happened? Are you hurt?" Sophia shook her head, unable to speak through her tears. Richard sat beside her, not touching her, just being present. After several minutes, she managed to gasp out words between sobs. "I cannot do this. I am not ready. I am going to fail. I am going to embarrass myself in front of everyone. My parents died believing I would be something special, and I am going to prove that I am not. All their sacrifices will have been for nothing." Richard listened to the torrent of fear and self-doubt. He recognized it as the panic that came before any major challenge, the moment when the enormity of what you were attempting became too much to bear. He had felt it himself before big presentations, before crucial meetings. But he had never felt it at the level Sophia was experiencing now. Her entire identity, her life's work, was about to be judged publicly. The pressure was immense. When her sobs finally subsided, Richard spoke quietly. "Do you remember what you told me about why you play? About how it is the only time you feel completely yourself?" Sophia nodded weakly. "You told me that when you play, everything makes sense. That it is worth any amount of stress. Do you still believe that?" Sophia was quiet for a moment, then nodded again. "Yes." "Then that is what you need to hold on to," Richard said. "Not the judgment, not the reviews, not what anyone else thinks. Just that feeling of being completely yourself. That is what you will bring to Carnegie Hall. That is what will make your performance special. All the technical preparation, all the hours of practice, those are important. But the reason people will remember your performance is because you will share something true about yourself. And that is something you already know how to do. I have heard it every time you play." Sophia looked at him with red, swollen eyes. "What if I freeze? What if I get out there and my mind goes blank?" "Then you will take a breath and find your way back," Richard said. "You have played these pieces hundreds of times. They are in your muscle memory, in your bones. Your hands know what to do even if your mind panics. Trust your body. Trust your preparation. And most importantly, trust that you belong on that stage. You won a competition to get this opportunity. You earned this. You deserve to be there." Sophia leaned her head on Richard's shoulder, exhausted from crying. "Thank you," she whispered. "For being here. For believing in me. For not giving up on me even when I wanted to give up on myself." Richard put his arm around her shoulders carefully. "I would not be anywhere else," he said. "And I will be in the audience on Friday night, cheering you on. You are not doing this alone." They sat like that for a long time, two people who had started as adversaries and had become something more. Friends. Supporters. People who had helped each other see their lives more clearly. The next day, Sophia seemed calmer, more focused. She practiced with renewed purpose, and Richard could hear the difference. There was a confidence in her playing that had not been there before. She was not just executing notes. She was claiming them, owning them, making them hers. Richard felt a surge of pride watching her work. This was someone who had pushed through doubt and fear to reach for something extraordinary. Whatever happened at Carnegie Hall, she had already won by having the courage to try. The day before the performance, Richard helped Sophia pack everything she would need. The dress, carefully wrapped in plastic. Her new bow and backup bow, both secured in protective cases. Rosin, spare strings, sheet music even though she had everything memorized. They made lists and checked them twice, leaving nothing to chance. Sophia was nervous but no longer panicking. She had entered that zone of calm that came after you had done everything possible to prepare and now just had to execute. That evening, they ordered Chinese food and ate it sitting on her floor, surrounded by the organized chaos of her apartment. "Tomorrow," Sophia said, "my life might change. Or it might stay exactly the same. Either way, at least I will know I gave it everything." Richard raised his glass of water in a toast. To tomorrow. To art. To courage. Sophia clinked her glass against his. To unlikely friendships. To neighbors who become family. They smiled at each other, and Richard realized something had fundamentally shifted in him over the past weeks. He had come to care about Sophia's success as much as he cared about his own. Maybe more. Her dreams had become important to him in a way that his own ambitions had not been in years. That night, Richard barely slept, but not because of noise. The apartment was quiet. Sophia had stopped practicing, following her teacher's advice to rest her hands and mind before the performance. Richard lay awake thinking about everything that had happened, about how his life had changed since he first knocked on Sophia's door with that ridiculous check. He had been so certain that money could solve his problem, that buying silence would give him peace. But real peace had come from something entirely different. From connection, from purpose, from caring about something beyond himself. The morning of the performance, Richard woke early and made a special breakfast. Pancakes, fruit, coffee. He brought it all next door and knocked gently. Sophia opened the door already dressed in casual clothes, her hair wet from the shower. She looked nervous but determined. "I made you breakfast," Richard said. "You need to eat something substantial. The performance is not until tonight, but you should fuel up now." Sophia smiled gratefully and invited him in. They ate together, not talking much, both lost in their own thoughts. After breakfast, Richard helped Sophia with final preparations. He carried her dress bag, her violin case, and a small overnight bag she had packed with essentials. They took a cab to Carnegie Hall, arriving early afternoon for the sound check and final rehearsal. Richard had never been backstage at Carnegie Hall. It was smaller than he expected, more utilitarian. Narrow hallways, cramped dressing rooms, none of the glamour that the audience saw. But there was an energy to the place, a sense of history. Sophia felt it too. He could see it in the way she moved, almost reverently, through the corridors. They found her dressing room, a small space with a mirror, a chair, and a small couch. Sophia unpacked her things carefully while Richard watched. "I should let you focus," he said. "Do you need anything else before I go?" Sophia turned to him. "Will you stay? Just for a little while? I do not want to be alone yet." Richard sat on the small couch while Sophia did her warm-up exercises. She did stretches to loosen her shoulders and arms. She hummed scales to warm up her ear. She played through passages on her violin, checking the acoustics of the space, adjusting to the environment. A stagehand knocked on the door. "Sound check in 15 minutes, Miss Reeves." Sophia acknowledged him and continued warming up. Richard could see the nerves building in her. Her hands were shaking slightly. Her breathing was shallow. He wanted to say something comforting, but he knew there were no words that would truly calm her. This was something she had to go through, had to feel, had to overcome on her own. But he could be present for it. When it was time for sound check, Richard walked with Sophia to the stage entrance. The curtain was down, but he could feel the enormity of the space beyond it. 2,800 seats, soon to be filled with people who had come to hear Sophia play. She stopped at the entrance, frozen. "I cannot breathe," she said. Richard took her hand. "Yes, you can. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Just like you practiced. Do it with me." They stood there breathing together until Sophia's panic subsided. "Better?" Richard asked. "A little," Sophia said. Richard squeezed her hand. "You are going to walk out there, and you are going to play the most beautiful music those people have ever heard. Not because you are perfect, but because you are you. Because you have something unique to share. And I will be right there in the audience, listening to every note." Sophia squeezed back. "Thank you for everything. For the bow, for the support, for listening to me practice all those months. For becoming my friend." Richard smiled. "It was my privilege. Now go show them what you can do." Sophia took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked onto the stage for sound check. Richard watched her go, feeling a mixture of pride and anxiety. This was her moment. He had done everything he could to help her prepare. Now it was up to her. Richard left the venue and went home to change into his suit. He had purchased a ticket for tonight's performance weeks ago, as soon as Sophia had told him the date. Orchestra section, 10th row center. One of the best seats in the house. He wanted to experience this properly, to witness Sophia's moment from the best possible vantage point. As he dressed, Richard thought about his own life, about the choices he had made and the ones he still needed to make. Watching Sophia pursue her passion with such dedication had awakened something in him. A desire for meaning, for purpose, for work that mattered beyond the paycheck. He was not sure what that would look like yet. He could not play an instrument or create art. But there had to be something, some way he could contribute to the world that would make him feel the way Sophia felt when she played her violin. Richard arrived at Carnegie Hall an hour before the performance. The lobby was filling with people, all dressed elegantly, carrying programs, chatting with excitement. Richard collected his ticket and program and made his way to his seat. The hall was magnificent, a testament to the importance society placed on art and culture. Red velvet seats, ornate architecture, perfect acoustics. Richard sat and read through the program. Sophia's biography was brief. 29 years old, winner of the Steinberg International Violin Competition, making her Carnegie Hall debut. The repertoire was ambitious. Works by Sarasate, Bach, Paganini. Pieces that would showcase both her technical skill and her emotional depth. The house lights dimmed at exactly 8 o'clock. The audience settled into an expectant hush. The curtain rose slowly, revealing a simply staged area. A chair for Sophia, a piano for David the accompanist. The stage was otherwise bare, putting all focus on the musicians. David walked out first and took his place at the piano. Polite applause. Then Sophia entered from stage left, and Richard's breath caught. She looked transformed. The simple black dress fit her perfectly, elegant and understated. Her hair was styled in a way he had never seen, pulled back to expose her face and neck. She carried her violin and bow with confidence, moving across the stage with grace. She looked like she belonged there, like she had been born for this moment. The applause grew louder as the audience recognized her entrance. Sophia walked to center stage and bowed, acknowledging the welcome. Then she raised her violin, positioned her bow, and glanced at David. A small nod between them. Then she began to play. The first piece was Sarasate's Carmen Fantasy, the same one she had been working on that first day Richard had sat in her apartment. He recognized it immediately and felt a surge of connection. He had heard her practice this piece dozens of times, had watched her struggle with difficult passages, had celebrated when she finally conquered them. And now here she was, playing it for thousands of people, and it was flawless. Her fingers flew across the fingerboard with precision. Her bow moved with strength and delicacy. The high notes rang out clear and true. The fast passages sparkled with energy. Richard found himself leaning forward, completely absorbed. This was not just technically impressive. This was music that told a story, that conveyed emotion, that made you feel something deep in your chest. Around him, the audience was equally captivated. No one moved. No one coughed. Everyone was held enthralled by the sound Sophia was creating. When the piece ended, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then the applause erupted, thunderous and sustained. People were not just clapping politely. They were celebrating, expressing genuine appreciation for what they had just witnessed. Sophia bowed, her face flushed with emotion and exertion. She glanced into the audience, and Richard wondered if she could see him there in the darkness. He applauded until his hands hurt, wanting her to know how proud he was, how moved he had been. The second piece was a Bach sonata, slower and more contemplative. Sophia played it with a tenderness that brought tears to Richard's eyes. He was not normally an emotional person, but something about hearing music he had heard practiced so many times now performed in its full glory overwhelmed him. This was what all those hours of repetition had been building toward. This moment of transcendence, of beauty shared with strangers who would carry it with them long. After they left the hall, the program continued. Paganini caprices that showcased Sophia's virtuosity. A contemporary piece by a living composer that was experimental and challenging. Each work revealed a different facet of Sophia's artistry. Her technical mastery, yes, but also her interpretive intelligence, her emotional depth, her ability to connect with the audience. Richard watched people around him, saw how they responded. Some closed their eyes, lost in the music. Others watched Sophia intently, mesmerized by her physical presence and the movement of her playing. A few quietly wiped away tears. Sophia was doing what great artists do. She was making strangers feel connected, reminding them of their shared humanity, giving them an experience they would remember for the rest of their lives. The final piece of the program was Sophia's own arrangement of a folk melody her father used to play. She had mentioned it to Richard in passing, saying she wanted to include something personal in the concert, something that honored her parents. Richard had not heard this piece before. Sophia had kept it private, saving it for the performance. As she began to play, Richard understood why. This was not just music. This was a love letter, a memorial, a conversation with the dead. The melody was simple and heartbreaking, played with such raw emotion that it felt like Sophia was bleeding through her instrument. She was not performing anymore. She was sharing her grief, her love, her memories. The audience felt it. Richard could see people openly crying now, moved by the honesty of what they were hearing. This was what Sophia had meant about art transcending time, about artists being memory keepers. Her parents were gone, but in this moment, through this music, they were present. Their love, their sacrifice, their belief in beauty, all of it was alive in the notes Sophia played. When the final note faded into silence, no one moved. The audience seemed to collectively hold its breath, not wanting to break the spell. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started as a ripple and grew into a wave, and then into something more. People rose to their feet, a standing ovation that filled the hall with sound. Sophia stood at center stage, her violin at her side, tears streaming down her face. She bowed once, twice, 3 times as the applause continued. Richard was standing too, clapping and cheering and not caring that he was crying in public. He had witnessed something extraordinary. Not just a successful performance, but a transformation. Sophia had walked onto that stage as a talented violinist hoping to prove herself. She was leaving it as an artist who had touched hearts, who had created something meaningful, who had honored her parents in her own dedication in the most profound way possible. The curtain fell and rose again for curtain calls. Sophia came out multiple times, sometimes alone, sometimes with David, always met with thunderous applause. Flowers were brought to the stage, bouquet after bouquet handed up from admirers. The ovation lasted nearly 10 minutes before the house lights finally came up and the audience began to disperse. Richard remained in his seat, emotionally exhausted, processing what he had just experienced. Around him, people were talking animatedly, sharing their reactions, praising the performance. Richard heard snippets of conversation. "Did you hear that tone? Absolutely breathtaking. Who is her teacher? I need to see her again." This was a debut for the ages. Richard felt proud on Sophia's behalf, proud that these strangers recognized what he had known for weeks. She was special. She had something rare and precious to offer the world. Richard made his way backstage, showing his pass to security. The corridors were crowded with people trying to see Sophia, to congratulate her, to network. Richard pushed through politely until he reached her dressing room. The door was open, and inside was chaos. People everywhere, talking, laughing, taking photos. Sophia was in the center of it all, still in her performance dress, holding multiple bouquets, looking overwhelmed and happy and exhausted. She saw Richard in the doorway and her face lit up. She excused herself from the people surrounding her and made her way to him. Before Richard could say anything, she threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. "We did it," she said into his shoulder. Richard hugged her back, not caring about the crowd watching. "You did it. That was incredible. You were incredible." They pulled apart and Sophia wiped her eyes. "There are so many people here. Critics, agents, venue managers. Everyone wants to talk to me. This is everything I dreamed of." Richard smiled. "Then you should enjoy it. I just wanted to tell you how proud I am. How moved I was by your performance. You did exactly what you set out to do. You played from your heart, and everyone felt it." Sophia squeezed his hand. "I could not have done this without you. You gave me more than a bow. You gave me confidence, support, friendship. You reminded me that there are good people in the world who help others for no reason except that it is the right thing to do." Richard shook his head. I helped because your music changed my life. Because you reminded me what passion looks like, what dedication looks like. You made me want to be better, to find something that matters as much to me as music matters to you. So really, I should be thanking you." A well-dressed woman approached them. "Miss Reeves, I am sorry to interrupt, but the Times critic would like a word with you. And there are several other people waiting." Sophia nodded and turned back to Richard. "Will you stay? We are having a small celebration later. Just close friends and supporters. I want you there." Richard smiled. "I would not miss it. You go do what you need to do. I will wait." He stepped back into the hallway, giving Sophia space to navigate her suddenly busy world. He leaned against the wall and watched the activity around him. This was the reality of success in the art world. One moment you were practicing in obscurity, the next you were in demand, your time claimed by people who wanted a piece of your success. Richard hoped Sophia would navigate it well, that she would stay true to herself despite the pressures and expectations that would now follow her. An hour later, the backstage area had quieted. Most people had left, moving on to after-parties and dinners. Sophia emerged from her dressing room, changed into casual clothes, her makeup mostly removed. She looked tired but content. "Ready to go?" Richard asked. She nodded. "There is a small restaurant near here where some friends are waiting. Just a few people who have been with me from the beginning. I want you to meet them." They took a cab to an Italian restaurant in Midtown. In the back room, a group of about 10 people were gathered around a large table. Sophia made introductions. Her violin teacher, an elderly woman with kind eyes who embraced Sophia with tears. 2 friends from music school who had driven down from Boston for the performance. Her former landlord from when she first moved to the city, who had let her practice at odd hours and never complained. Her aunt and uncle who had helped financially when things were tough. And Richard, who had started as a neighbor who wanted silence and had become family. They ate and drank and celebrated into the early morning hours. Stories were shared about Sophia's journey, about close calls and near disasters and moments of doubt. Everyone at the table had played a role in helping her reach this night, and their pride was evident. Sophia's violin teacher gave a speech about recognizing Sophia's talent when she was just a child, about knowing even then that she was destined for something special. "I have taught hundreds of students," the teacher said. "But Sophia is different. She does not just play the violin. She becomes the violin. That is a gift that cannot be taught. It can only be nurtured. And tonight, the world saw what I have known for 20 years. Sophia is not just a great violinist. She is an artist who has something important to say." The table applauded, and Sophia blushed, uncomfortable with the praise but clearly moved by it. As the evening wound down, Richard found himself in conversation with Sophia's teacher. "You are the neighbor she told me about," the woman said. "The one who offered her money to stop practicing." Richard felt embarrassed. "That is me. Not my proudest moment." The teacher laughed. "Do not feel bad. You came around. And in the process, you became exactly what Sophia needed. Someone who believed in her not because they understood music, but because they understood dedication. That is just as valuable." She leaned closer. "Can I tell you something? Sophia was close to giving up a few weeks ago. The pressure was too much. She called me crying, saying she was not ready, that she should cancel the performance. I tried to encourage her, but I could tell my words were not getting through. Then something changed. She started to sound different on her calls. More confident. More centered. I asked her what happened, and she said she had a friend who was helping her see things clearly. I assume that friend was you." Richard felt warmth spread through his chest at the teacher's words. He had not realized how much his support had mattered to Sophia during those crucial weeks. The celebration ended near midnight, with hugs and promises to stay in touch. Richard and Sophia shared a cab back to their building, both exhausted but energized by the evening's success. They stood in the hallway between their apartments, neither quite ready to say goodnight. In the weeks following Carnegie Hall, Sophia's life transformed completely. Offers poured in from concert halls across the country. Record labels contacted her about album deals. She was invited to perform with prestigious orchestras. The struggling musician who could barely afford rent was now fielding opportunities that would secure her career for years to come. Richard watched her navigate this new reality with grace and humility. She never forgot the people who had helped her, including him. One evening, she knocked on his door with an envelope in her hand. Richard opened it to find a check for $15,000, the exact amount he had spent on her bow. "I told you I would pay you back when I could," Sophia said. "I just signed my first major contract. This is yours." Richard looked at the check, then handed it back to her. "Keep it. Invest it in your career. Buy new strings, commission new pieces, whatever you need." That bow was a gift, not a loan. Sophia shook her head firmly. "Then consider this a gift back. You helped me when I had nothing. Let me help you now." Richard realized she needed to do this, needed to feel like their friendship was balanced. He took the check and smiled. "Thank you. But I want you to know that what you gave me was worth more than any amount of money. You reminded me that passion and purpose matter more than paychecks. That changed everything for me." The following month, Richard made his own transformation. He resigned from his position at the investment firm and accepted a job at a nonprofit that provided funding for young artists. The pay was significantly less, but the work felt meaningful in a way his corporate career never had. He helped talented musicians, painters, and writers get the resources they needed to pursue their dreams. He thought of it as paying forward what he had done for Sophia. They remained close friends and neighbors. Sometimes Richard would sit in Sophia's apartment while she practiced new pieces, offering encouragement and a familiar presence. Other times, they would share meals and talk about their changing lives, about how a simple conflict over noise had led them both to become better versions of themselves. Years later, when Sophia performed at Carnegie Hall again, this time as an established artist rather than a debut, Richard was there in the front row. As she played, he remembered the struggling musician who had once lived next door, the woman he had tried to silence with money. He was grateful she had refused. That refusal had saved them both. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.